Hey, and for 1.2, Introduction to Cells, I'm just going to go through the PDF and add any information I think could be helpful. But here we're introduced to cells, and you should know this by now, of course, but they are the basic unit of life. All living things or organisms are made up of tiny, tiny cells. And of course, microscopes, when they were developed initially a while ago in the 1600s, allowed us to see these very tiny cells. And the cell theory was eventually developed by these three scientists. If you're interested in learning more about them, I suggest Googling or YouTubing Theodor Schwann, Rudolf Virchow, Matthias Schleiden. Schleiden. But they developed this theory of three ideas that are key. Cell is the basic unit of life. All living organisms are composed of cells that can be either unicellular or multicellular. And one or more cells come from existing cells. So cells reproduce and produce more cells. And after these three ideas, there are more that have been introduced. Energy flow occurs within cells. DNA, or hereditary information, is passed on from cell to cell. And this DNA controls all activities of a cell and the information needed to make up another cell. And these cells have the same chemical composition. Now, as I said before, cells combine to form tissues, tissues combine to form organs, and these organs form organ systems within the body. And cells come in hundreds of types. All living things are made up of cells. So think of the smallest animal you can think of with your naked eye, of course. Ants are very small, tiny mites are comprised of cells. And even incredibly large animals like whales, elephants, bears, all these larger animals are comprised of cells as well. But the smallest unit is all the same, cells. And when they combine together, they form important types of tissues and types of organs, and we'll get into that later. Types of cells: prokaryote or eukaryote. Prokaryote are cells, prokaryotic cells are the very first type of cells presented on Earth. These are very basic organisms, if that makes sense to you. They are the bare minimum of life. Billions of years, these guys were life forms, and pretty much the only life forms. If you break down this word, pro means before, karyon refers to nucleus. So prokaryon, before, and nucleus. Prokaryotic organisms are made up of just one cell, so unicellular. Whereas eukaryotic cells showed up about 1 billion years ago, and these guys are much more complex. Prokaryote, very primitive, primordial, prokaryotic, whereas eukaryotic They can be either one cell, unicellular, or multicellular. This means an organism can be made up of only one eukaryotic cell, but most living things we're familiar with have multiple cells, multiple eukaryotic cells. So think of unicellular eukaryotic organisms. This would be fungi, fungus, algae, whereas multicellular, more complex organisms would be you and me, humans, plants, insects, and other animals. Here is the anatomy of human cells. There are several types of eukaryotic cells. So for example, we have skin cells that make up skin tissue. And then the skin tissue, this contains other related cells too. That makes up your integumentary system. Very fun word. You also have lung cells, bone cells, blood cells, nerve cells, all for a specific function. Although there are different types of eukaryotic cells, they all have the same basic components. Unlike prokaryotes, eukaryotes contain membrane-covered organelles. And organelles are individual components of a cell that perform a variety of functions. They operate like microscopic organs to keep the cell healthy. So you can think of organelles as little organs, organelles. They're cute little organs inside of a cell for a cell. So this is the wrap-up page. The cell theory teaches us that any living thing is made up of cells, whether they are unicellular, multicellular. These cells give us energy and determine heredity through our DNA. The human body is made up of cells, and every organ, tissue, part of our body is made up of specific types of cells. And if we can understand the basic building blocks of life, that is a good start to learn about the rest of the human body as well. So that is Unit 1, Section 2. Let's see. Let's get on to the next. Anatomy of a cell. Oh, not the video. Let's do the PDF version. Anatomy of a cell. So, back to where we were. Cells are the basic unit of life, making up all living things, like we said. Body's made up of different kinds of cells: bones, muscle cells, nerve cells, skin cells. Now, within a cell, the plasma membrane is a very thin layer of protein and fat that surrounds the cell. It is the material that divides the inside of a cell with the outside. The plasma membrane is semi-permeable. And permeable means allowed to move through. So semi means that it allows some things to go in and out of the cell. But this covers the entire cell. Cytoplasm is the material within a cell, namely all the organelles within a cell and the thick jelly-like fluid that surrounds them. It contains the material necessary for chemical reactions and is the cell's atmosphere. It enables the cell to live, grow, and reproduce. So all of the organelles within a cell and the thick jelly-like fluid that surrounds them is referred to as cytoplasm. The nucleus, everybody knows how important the nucleus is. This spherical shaped nucleus is the prime organelle. We refer to it as the brain in anatomy. The nucleus is surrounded by a nuclear membrane and contains thick fluid similar to cytoplasm called nucleoplasm. So plasm, you notice, is similar endings, but nucleo just means membrane in the nucleus or surrounding the nucleus. Most cells contain one nucleus, but some actually have more than one nucleus. Note, nuclei is the plural version of nucleus because English is interesting. Well, that's not our language, but we borrow things from other languages. The nucleus contains a nucleolus and chromatin. The nucleolus and chromatin determine what a cell will look like and how it will function. So this chromatin houses genetic material, and that includes DNA. And this DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. Go ahead, try and say it. Deoxyribonucleic acid. Deoxyribonucleic acid. Yeah, fun word, fun long word to say, but DNA will work for our purposes. It contains the genetic makeup of a cell and acts as a blueprint, a guide for creating new cells. Organelles are like little organs for this cell. And this is all within the cytoplasm. They come in different types. They act like microscopic organs and keeps the cell running smoothly. Here are the main organelles found within a human cell: endoplasmic reticulum, ribosomes, Golgi complex, lysosomes, peroxisome, vacuoles, centrioles, mitochondria, cilia, and flagella. Endoplasmic reticulum, or ER, to make things a little simpler to say, it is a flattened sac-like structure that acts as a tunnel. It's located throughout all of the cell, and there are two types, rough and smooth. Rough endoplasmic reticulum, or ER, contains what we call ribosomes, and we'll look at that later. While the smooth ER does not contain these ribosomes. And these ribosomes are the smallest and the most abundant. There are the most ribosomes compared to anything else in the cell. And these guys make protein. Golgi complex, also known as the Golgi apparatus. They are flat sacs closest to the outer edge of the cell. And the Golgi complex sorts out, packages, and transports proteins and fats throughout the cell. Lysosomes are phagocytic, and that means they kill or destroy. So these lysosomes have enzymes, and this allows them to function in a way that destroys damaged organelles and protects the cell from outside substances. So these are little like bodyguards almost. Peroxisomes are most prevalent in the kidney or liver. They contain enzymes as well, but they use enzymes to break down fat or other chemicals. Vacuoles. These are organelles that function as storage containers. So think of vacuum being an empty space. So vacuoles are spaces where organelles can store things. Centrioles, these are tubular structures that come in pairs. They are important for cells to divide and make other new cells. Mitochondria, I guess it's kind of a meme how they're always referred to as the powerhouse, but they really are. They create energy. They are organelles that contain their very own ribosomes and DNA, and they can come in all types of shapes and sizes. Here's the inside of one. But they make energy within the cell. Cilia Flagella, these are little hair-like appendages or add-ons on the interior of the cell that contains cytoplasm. And their purpose is to move and transfer material throughout the cell. Cilia are shorter and work together like oars on a boat, kind of rowing, while flagella are longer and use a whip-like motion. So pictured here are cilia, shorter, flagella, whips. So at a microscopic level, cells perform all types of functions. All the parts of the cell work together to keep it healthy and functioning properly. So that's the intro to cells and what comprises of a cell, what the cell contains. And then we're going to get into, oh, I did the video again. Why did I do that? We're going to get into integumentary. Fun word, like I said before. But yeah, trick question. What is the largest organ in your body? It is, in fact, your skin. It's the largest and heaviest system of the human body. It's washable, waterproof, regulates temperature, defends against germs, senses, and it also repairs itself. The skin is part of the integumentary system. And this system is a system that contains skin, the glands within your skin, hair, and nails. The skin is the outer covering for the entire human body, and it consists of 3 layers: the epidermis, dermis, and hypodermis. And the epidermis is at the very surface level. It's made up of epithelial cells, which means protective. These cells only live for about a month, and new ones are always being generated. It's not as stretchable as the other layers, but it acts as protection, a barrier against invading substances from the outside world. It's thicker in some parts of the body, especially the parts that are constantly working. So think of your palms and the bottoms of your feet. Since they're always touching things mostly compared to other parts of the body, the epidermis is thicker because it needs a little more protection in those areas. The epidermis is a protective layer, and it consists of 5 layers within it. The first is called stratum corneum. It's the outer layer, and you can see it with your own eyes. The cells are replaced with keratin, which is a very hard protein surface, and it makes our skin tough and resistant to harmful things. Keratin deadens the cells, the dead cells shed, and then they're replaced by even stronger cells. Stratum lucidum, this next layer consists of a band of packed, flattened cells in between the corneum, which is what we talked about before, and the granulosum. The lucidum layer is not present everywhere, especially when it has thicker skin. It's unnecessary. Granulosum is the next layer. It is arranged in about 3 layers just underneath the corneum layer, underneath the corneum layer. The nucleus of these cells begins to disappear. So see how these nucleus cells have in the next layer, but in this specific layer, the nucleus begins to disappear. The next layer, spinosum, is located between the previous granulosum and the basal layer. If you put this layer underneath a microscope, and show extensions of the cytoplasm into the basal layer, they are more of a polyhedral shape. The next layer, basal, it's directly above the dermis. So we have the epidermis, the dermis, and the hypodermis. And the layer right above the dermis is this basal. This is where new skin cells are created to replace the older, dying, dead cells that are lost from the outermost layer. So in the deepest layer of the epidermis is where new skin cells are developed. Melanocytes are found in this layer. These are the cells that produce color of the skin, called melanin. Melanin protects the skin from ultraviolet radiation from the sun. So this basal layer creates new cells that eventually move towards the outermost epidermis layer, the corneum. Unlike most cells, the epidermis does not have its own direct blood supply. For that, it relies on the dermis beneath it. The thickest layer of the skin, the dermis, is located between, you guessed it, the epidermis and the hypodermis. The dermis provides the blood supply necessary for the epidermis, but it's also stretchable and tough. Here is where sweat glands are also stored. Hair follicles, nerve endings, and small blood vessels are also located in the dermis. The nerve endings in the skin send impulses of temperature, touch, and pain back to the brain. This makes the skin a sensory organ. The blood vessels in the skin aid with transporting nutrients and regulating your body temperature. So we have the outermost epidermis, and the dermis brings blood and helps with regulating your temperature and transports nutrients. The hypodermis is the deepest layer, also known as the subcutis, is the layer just underneath the dermis. And it's mostly composed of adipose tissue. This is fat. It's loosely connective tissue referred to as fat. It has its own blood supply like the dermis. The layer loosely connects the skin to the muscle, allowing the muscle to move without tugging directly on the skin. The main function of the hypodermis, the main functions, plural, are shock absorption and heat insulation. So it stores the heat inside your body and it keeps it from escaping. And shock absorption, if your body is hit by something, shocks this system, the adipose tissue will help deflect and spread out the shock. And that finishes up that section. And I will get back to finish these other ones later. Okay. But I hope this has been helpful, and I will see you guys soon. Bye-bye.